When I bought my townhouse in Willow Creek Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect place to start my renovation business. The H.O.A. seemed reasonable enough during the walkthrough, and the previous owner mentioned that small improvements were generally welcomed. What I didn't anticipate was Karen Pemberton, the newly elected H.O.A. president who treated her position like she was running a small dictatorship. My first encounter with Karen happened 3 days after I moved in. I was unloading my truck full of renovation supplies when she appeared at my doorstep, clipboard in hand, wearing a bright yellow safety vest that read, H.O.A. Official in bold letters. Karen, what exactly are you the president of? A homeowners association of 12 townhouses. Excuse me, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I don't see any construction permits posted in your window. According to Section 4.7 of our community guidelines, all renovation work must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. She tapped her clipboard with a pen. That would be me. I explained that I was simply moving in my tools and hadn't started any construction yet. Karen's eyes narrowed as she peered past me into my garage. Those look like professional-grade tools. Are you planning to run a business out of this residence? Because Section 2.3 clearly states that commercial activities are prohibited. I'm not running a business here, I replied calmly. I'm renovating my own home. These are just my personal tools. What I didn't mention was that I just sold my previous renovation company for a substantial profit and was planning to flip this place as a personal project before starting my next venture. Karen scribbled something on her clipboard. We'll see about that. I'll be monitoring this situation very closely. She marched away, her safety vest practically glowing in the afternoon sun. Over the next 2 weeks, I submitted my renovation plans through proper channels. My project was straightforward, updating the kitchen, bathrooms, and adding a home office in the basement. Everything was well within code and didn't affect the exterior appearance of the building. I even hired a licensed architect to ensure the plans met all requirements. Karen rejected my application within hours. Her reasoning? The proposed renovations are too extensive and may disturb other residents. When I pointed out that similar renovations had been approved for other units, she claimed those were different circumstances and refused to elaborate. I resubmitted with scaled-back plans. Rejected again. This time, Karen claimed the materials I'd specified weren't consistent with community standards. When I asked what materials would be acceptable, she said I needed to figure that out myself. After the third rejection, I decided to attend the monthly H.O.A. meeting. The gathering was held in Karen's living room, and I was surprised to discover that only 4 other homeowners bothered to show up. Karen sat behind a folding table, gavel in hand, treating the informal gathering like a courtroom proceeding. New business, Karen announced, glaring directly at me. We have a resident who continues to submit inadequate renovation proposals. I move that we implement a moratorium on all construction projects until further notice. Wait a minute, said Janet from Unit 7. You can't just ban all renovations. My bathroom ceiling is literally falling apart. Karen's face flushed red. The H.O.A. board has the authority to protect property values through reasonable restrictions. If people would submit proper applications instead of trying to turn their homes into construction zones, we wouldn't need such measures. I stood up. Karen, I've submitted 3 different proposals, each addressing your previous concerns. You've rejected them all without providing clear guidelines for approval. I have the right to improve my own property. You have the right to follow community standards, Karen shot back. Standards that I was elected to enforce. She banged her gavel. Motion approved. Construction moratorium is now in effect. I looked around the room. Janet shook her head in disgust. The other 3 residents looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Karen had effectively voted herself the power to ban all improvements because she didn't like my project. The next morning, I decided to proceed with non-construction improvements while I figured out my legal options. I began by painting my interior walls, something that didn't require H.O.A. approval. That's when I discovered Karen's true level of pettiness. She started conducting wellness checks every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, pounding on my door and demanding to inspect my progress. I need to ensure you're not violating the construction moratorium, she'd announce, pushing past me into my living room. That paint smell is quite strong. Are you using approved low-VOC products? When I showed her the paint cans clearly labeled as environmentally friendly, she claimed the fumes were still disruptive to neighbors. She threatened to fine me $50 per day for creating a nuisance. I pointed out that painting interior walls wasn't construction, but Karen insisted that any home improvement fell under the moratorium. The harassment escalated quickly. Karen began leaving violation notices on my door for increasingly ridiculous infractions. Excessive deliveries disrupting community peace. Tool storage visible through garage window. Suspicious activity during construction hours. She was literally making up rules as she went along. 2 weeks into this routine, I noticed something odd. Karen's daily inspections were lasting longer, and she was spending considerable time in my basement where I'd stacked building materials. She claimed she needed to document potential safety hazards, but something felt off about her behavior. I decided to install a security camera system throughout my townhouse. The cameras were discreet, high-quality units that connected to my phone for remote monitoring. I told myself it was just for general security, but honestly, I wanted to document Karen's harassment in case I needed legal evidence. What I captured on camera 3 days later was far worse than harassment. The footage showed Karen entering my basement at 2 a.m., using what appeared to be a copied key. She spent nearly an hour down there. And when I reviewed the recording, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen was systematically damaging my stored materials. She poured water on my drywall sheets, scattered screws across my organized tool layout, and used a hammer to crack several ceramic tiles I'd special ordered for the bathroom renovation. But the worst part came when she opened a can of paint and poured it directly onto my new hardwood flooring materials. These weren't cheap pine boards, they were imported Brazilian cherry that had cost me nearly $3,000. Karen was methodically destroying thousands of dollars worth of supplies, while muttering to herself about teaching people to follow the rules. I watched in stunned silence as she climbed the basement stairs and calmly exited through my back door. The entire break-in had taken 57 minutes, and she'd caused approximately $8,000 in damage to my renovation supplies. My first instinct was to call 911 immediately, but something made me pause. Karen had just handed me the perfect opportunity for the kind of creative solution I specialized in during my business career. Instead of simply getting her arrested, I could turn this situation into something far more devastating for someone who clearly thrived on controlling others. I spent the next morning researching property law and H.O.A. regulations. As someone who'd built and sold several successful companies, I'd learned to see opportunities where others saw problems. Karen's little crime spree had just opened a door to something much bigger than a simple vandalism charge. Here's what most people don't know about H.O.A. law. When a board member commits a crime related to their official duties, it can void their authority and potentially dissolve the entire organization's legal protections. Karen hadn't just broken into my property as a neighbor, she'd done it as the self-appointed enforcer of H.O.A. rules. That made it a much more serious legal issue. But I had an even better idea brewing. During my research, I discovered that our H.O.A. had never been properly incorporated with the state. Karen's predecessor had apparently filed some paperwork, but had missed several crucial legal requirements. Our entire H.O.A. existed in a legal gray area that Karen clearly didn't understand. I made some phone calls to my attorney, a sharp woman named Lisa Chun who specialized in property law, and had helped me navigate several complex real estate deals over the years. When I explained the situation and showed her the security footage, her eyes lit up with the same predatory gleam I'd seen when she dismantled opposing counsel in court. "This is beautiful," Lisa said, reviewing the evidence. "She's committed breaking and entering, vandalism and abuse of power. But more importantly, she's done it while acting as an illegitimate authority figure. We can destroy her on multiple levels." We spent the afternoon crafting a comprehensive legal strategy that would address not just Karen's crimes, but the entire foundation of her power trip. Lisa filed criminal charges for the break-in and property damage, but that was just the opening move. The real genius came when Lisa discovered that our townhouse development had been built on land with specific deed restrictions that Karen had been violating for months. Her construction moratorium? Completely illegal under the original development agreement. Her arbitrary rejection of my renovation plans? A breach of fiduciary duty that opened her up to personal liability. But we saved the best surprise for last. Lisa found a loophole in the property deed that allowed any homeowner to petition the county for individual exemption from HOA authority if the organization was found to be operating outside its legal mandate. Since Karen had been making up rules and enforcing them through criminal activity, we had grounds to petition for complete independence from her authority. Within 48 hours, Lisa had filed a comprehensive lawsuit that targeted Karen personally, not just in her role as HOA president. We were seeking damages for the property destruction, legal fees for dealing with her harassment, and injunctive relief to prevent further interference with my renovation project. The lawsuit also requested that the court investigate the HOA's legal standing and Karen's fitness to serve in any leadership capacity. Karen received the legal papers on a Friday afternoon while she was conducting another one of her inspections of the neighborhood. I watched from my window as the process server explained the situation to her. Her face went through several shades of red before settling on a pale green that suggested she might actually vomit right there on the sidewalk. But that was just the beginning. The real shock came when Karen realized we'd also filed a motion to dissolve the entire HOA based on its improper incorporation and Karen's criminal abuse of authority. If successful, every homeowner in the development would be free from her ridiculous rules and restrictions. The criminal charges were filed simultaneously, with security footage evidence that clearly showed Karen's break-in and vandalism. The district attorney's office was particularly interested in the case because it involved abuse of authority by an elected official, even if it was just a neighborhood HOA president. Karen spent the weekend frantically calling every homeowner in the development, trying to rally support for her position. What she discovered was that most residents were thrilled at the possibility of dissolving the HOA entirely. Janet from Unit 7 volunteered to testify about Karen's arbitrary rejection of her bathroom repairs. The couple in Unit 3 admitted they'd been afraid to make any improvements because of Karen's unpredictable rules. By Monday morning, Karen was facing criminal charges, a massive civil lawsuit, and the complete collapse of her little kingdom. But I still had one more surprise waiting for her. During my research into the property's history, I discovered something fascinating. The original developer of our townhouse complex had retained ownership of a small parcel of land at the entrance to the development, originally intended for a community center that was never built. That land had been sitting unused for years, generating property tax bills that the developer's estate was eager to eliminate. I bought that parcel for a surprisingly reasonable price, along with the rights to control access to our development's main entrance. Technically, every resident had an easement for access, but the actual ownership of the entrance road now belonged to me. Karen didn't realize the implications until she received the certified letter, explaining the new ownership structure. As the owner of the entrance property, I now had the legal right to install gates, security systems, and access controls, subject only to providing reasonable access to existing residents. I also had the right to approve or deny any visitors to the development, including HOA inspectors, contractors working for other residents, and anyone else Karen might try to bring in to support her position. In effect, I just gained more actual authority over the neighborhood than Karen had ever possessed, and I'd done it through completely legal property acquisition. The final piece of my revenge came when I realized that Karen's own HOA rules, the ones she'd used to harass me for months, could be turned against her with devastating precision. Since she'd established that any construction or improvement required HOA approval, and since the HOA's authority was now being challenged in court, Karen was technically in violation of her own moratorium. Karen had been making unauthorized improvements to her own unit throughout the summer. She'd installed new landscaping, painted her front door, and replaced her mailbox without submitting any approval requests. Under her own rules, each of those changes required Architectural Review Committee approval. Since she was the Architectural Review Committee, she'd essentially been approving her own projects without proper procedure. Lisa filed an additional complaint documenting Karen's violations of her own regulations, seeking injunctive relief to halt all of Karen's unauthorized improvements, and demanding that she restore her property to its original condition. The delicious irony was that Karen would have to undo months of her own home improvements using the exact same rules she'd used to torment me. But the absolute masterpiece of this revenge was what happened when all the legal pieces came together simultaneously. Karen received notice on the same day that she was being criminally prosecuted for breaking into my property, civilly sued for damages and harassment, investigated by the county for H.O.A. misconduct, required to remove her own unauthorized home improvements, and informed that I now controlled access to the entire development. The morning when all of Karen's legal notices arrived by certified mail, I happened to be outside checking my mailbox. I watched her face as she signed for envelope after envelope, her expression shifting from confusion to horror to complete devastation, as she realized the scope of what was happening. Karen looked up from the stack of legal papers in her hands, her face pale and her H.O.A. official safety vest hanging crooked on her shoulders. Her eyes met mine across the small courtyard between our units, and in that moment, I could see her understanding that her months of petty harassment had just destroyed everything she tried to build. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, staring down at the papers that detailed the complete collapse of her little empire. Karen's hands were actually shaking as she realized that her own rules, her own criminal behavior, and her own abuse of authority had been turned into a legal weapon that would strip away every bit of power she'd worked so hard to accumulate. The look on Karen's face was one of pure shock, as she finally understood that in trying to control everyone else, she'd lost control of everything that mattered to her.